A small accidental collision, a fleeting inconvenience, became a pretext for confrontation. For the two policemen, it seemed that her mere presence, a black woman in a professional business suit, was something unpleasant, a thorn in the eye that needed to be removed. The woman was confronted with an arrogant attitude, unreasonable questions about her presence in this very place. And when she, with her calm and clear understanding of the law, asked them to behave properly, that was when the real storm hit. She had to stand and listen to words designed to humiliate, to degrade. Venomous words echoed through the solemn hallways, aimed at her color, her gender, everything about her. They were deliberately trying to humiliate her in front of the crowd. And then, the unbelievable happened. Just because she dared to speak up to defend her honor, just because she would not silently accept injustice, the woman was handcuffed. Treated roughly like a dangerous criminal, right where she could have represented justice just a few minutes before. Escorted away amid the stunned and curious eyes of everyone. The two policemen were gloating and complacent. They thought they had won, had taught this stubborn woman a lesson. But they had made a terrible mistake, a mistake born of blind prejudice and unbridled abuse of power. They had no idea who they were messing with. They had no idea that this act of illegal detention and humiliation was not just an isolated incident, but would open up a far-reaching investigation, not only into their actions today, but also into the dark pages of their own past, corruption and abuse of power that may have been hidden for a long time. What happens next when the truth is revealed? What shock awaits the two policemen? And what is the ultimate price for arrogance and discrimination? Let's follow this story full of anger and surprise. The main hallway of the district courthouse on a late Tuesday afternoon always has a special atmosphere. The solemnity of the high wood-paneled walls, polished marble floors, and heavy courtroom doors seems overwhelmed by the hustle, tension, and conflicting emotions of the people passing by. The sound of high heels clicking on the floor, the murmur of lawyers in their neat suits chatting, the rustle of papers, the sound of doors opening and closing, and somewhere there are the tired sighs of people who have just gone through stressful hearings. Amidst that flow, police officers and court security staff move around, maintaining order, their eyes alert, but sometimes revealing the fatigue of a workday approaching its end. Naomi Sinclair just walked out of courtroom 4 after finishing the final arguments in a complex criminal case that had lasted for several days. Her business suit hugged her well-proportioned figure. Her black hair was neatly tied up. Her intelligent, sharp face had a hint of fatigue, but her eyes still shone with determination and concentration. She held a thick file in her arms. Before returning to her office upstairs, she paused for a moment in the empty space next to the main entrance of the hallway, leaned lightly against the cool wall, and took out her phone to quickly check a few important messages from her superiors. She stood still, trying not to obstruct the flow of people rushing back and forth. At that moment, two police officers in familiar dark blue uniforms walked up the hall. The first, Officer Frank Miller, was in his late 50s, looking tired and bored, his face deeply lined with frowns. Behind him was Officer Chris Vance, younger, with a somewhat arrogant air, his eyes darting from side to side as if searching for something to distract him after finishing the boring task of escorting a prisoner. As he passed by where Naomi was standing, perhaps because she was looking down at her phone and was a bit out of sight, or simply out of carelessness and indifference, Vance walked too close and his shoulder bumped Naomi's, causing the file in her hand to fall to the floor. "Oh!" Naomi cried out in surprise, and the rather strong knock. She quickly bent down to pick up the important papers that were flying everywhere. Instead of a formal apology, Vance paused, smirking, his voice full of mockery. "What are you doing walking like that? Where are you looking?" Miller, who was walking ahead, also stopped and turned to look at Naomi, who was busy picking up the documents with a condescending look. "The courthouse hallway is not a place to stand and take selfies or use your phone. You're in the way." The two policemen's rude and unreasonable attitude surprised and annoyed Naomi. She looked up and looked straight at them. "I was standing against the wall and not blocking anyone's way," Naomi replied, her voice calm but firm after she had picked up the file. "You bumped into me. An apology would be more appropriate than blame." She was used to facing and countering unreasonable arguments. But Naomi's calm and straightforward response seemed to irritate the two police officers. They were not used to being lectured by someone, especially a black woman in their place of authority. "Apologize?" Vance sneered, stepping closer to Naomi. "What right do you have to demand an apology from the police? You look like a nice guy, but you're probably just here for a court appearance, right?" He glanced at the file in Naomi's hand with disdain. Miller chimed in, his tone full of prejudice. "Or visiting a family member in jail? You niggers are always making trouble and breaking the rules." He used racial slurs openly and brazenly in the courthouse hallway. Naomi was stunned by the blatant insults. She felt the blood rush to her face, but she tried to maintain her composure as a lawmaker. "What are you saying? I demand that you stop this discriminatory and slanderous rhetoric. You are in a court of law, a place where justice and the law are represented." "Justice?" Miller sneered. "We are justice here. What are you doing in this courthouse? What are you doing hanging around here?" He was deliberately provocative. "Show me your identification, now," he demanded, without any reason. Naomi knew her rights. "I am under no obligation to show you my identification just because I am standing in this hallway. You have no legitimate reason or reasonable suspicion to ask for it. You are abusing your authority." Being flatly refused and then questioned about their authority made both Miller and Vance even angrier. They felt like they had been slapped in the face. "Ah! You dare defy the police?" Vance shouted, his voice full of menace. He moved closer, almost pressing his face against Naomi's. "I'm warning you for the last time," Miller growled, his hand on the gun at his side in a veiled threat. "Don't act like a showman here. Hand over your papers or don't blame us for not showing you any mercy." Then they began to curse even more, using vulgar, obscene language directed at Naomi's ethnicity, skin color, and gender. They were loud enough to echo throughout the courtroom, drawing the attention of many people present. People stopped, stunned by the unbelievable scene. Two police officers were publicly humiliating a woman in the middle of the courtroom. Naomi felt her face burning with anger and shame at the eyes that were on her. Despite being publicly humiliated and threatened, Naomi Sinclair tried to maintain her stance and her last shred of dignity. She knew that if she showed fear or submission now, it would only serve to further embolden the two abusers. "You are behaving like thugs, not police," Naomi said, her voice shaking with anger but trying to remain clear. "This behavior is completely unacceptable. I will report this whole thing to your superiors and the Internal Affairs Department." That statement, instead of discouraging Miller and Vance, was the final straw. They took it as a direct and unforgivable challenge. "Report? Who do you think you can report?" Miller sneered viciously. He turned to Vance and gestured. "Arrest this stubborn woman. Public order disturbance in court, failure to comply with orders of an officer, signs of rebellion." He shouted blatantly fabricated charges to justify his retaliation. Vance, as if waiting for this moment, immediately rushed forward and grabbed Naomi's arm violently. Naomi tried to pull her hand away reflexively. "Don't touch me! You have no right!" "No right! Resistance!" Vance shouted, using all his strength to throw Naomi's arms behind her back. She staggered, the file in her hand falling to the floor again. Vance didn't care. He pressed her against the hallway wall, roughly twisting both her arms behind her back. There was a cold, metallic clang as Vance pulled out a pair of handcuffs and locked them around Naomi's wrists. He tightened them deliberately, causing sharp pain. The arrest took place in the middle of the solemn courthouse hallway, with many onlookers looking on in shock and horror. No one dared to intervene, perhaps out of fear of the police's power or simply out of a desire to avoid trouble. Naomi felt humiliated and helpless. Right in the place where she fought for justice every day, she was now being treated like a criminal by the very people who were supposed to be enforcing the law, handcuffed and humiliated simply because of the color of her skin and for daring to speak up and demand respect. Tears almost welled up in her eyes, but she fought back the urge. Her face was cold and hard, her eyes staring straight ahead, no longer filled with fear, but with anger and a steely determination to bring these two men to justice. "Go! Go to work in the security room!" Miller shouted, looking triumphant. He and Vance began to escort Naomi down the hallway, pushing her roughly, all the while muttering threats and insults. They had no idea that the path they were leading this woman down was not the path to a holding cell, but the path to their own downfall. Officers Miller and Vance escorted Naomi Sinclair into a small holding room hidden in the courthouse. They pushed her into a cold metal chair, her hands still cuffed behind her back. Their demeanor was still arrogant, smug at having subdued her defiance. Miller began reporting the incident to a courthouse security officer who was present, painting the story as one that placed the blame squarely on Naomi. She was disruptive, verbally abusive, disobedient, resisting arrest. He was trying to create the most unfavorable record possible for her. The officer on duty, probably someone familiar with the messy courtroom scene, began the process of taking Naomi's personal information for a detention order. He pulled out a form and began asking the usual questions. "Full name?" "Naomi Sinclair," Naomi replied, her voice strangely calm, without a trace of fear or panic. "Permanent address?" She gave the address clearly. Miller and Vance stood nearby, arms crossed, smirking, waiting to see what she would say next. "Occupation?" the officer asked again. Naomi raised her head, her cold eyes fixed on Miller and Vance, who had yet to realize what was about to happen. Then she turned to the officer on duty, her voice clear, coherent, and filled with an undeniable weight. "Deputy Prosecutor, Office of the District Attorney." The title rang out in the small room like a ticking time bomb. The officer on duty, who was taking notes, dropped his pen. He froze, eyes wide, looking at Naomi, then back down at the paper, then back at Naomi. Ada, Deputy DA, this woman? He knew who the ADAs were. They were the powerful people in the local justice system, the ones who could put police officers like him on trial. He immediately realized the terrible gravity of the situation. But the duty officer's shock was nothing compared to the seismic event taking place in the minds of Miller and Vance. Their ears rang. The deputy prosecutor, the one they had just cursed with the worst words, the one they had just handcuffed and arrested in her own workplace? No, no way! It was unbelievable. Miller and Vance's faces went white in an instant. Their smug smiles froze and then crumbled. Their eyes widened in horror, looking at Naomi as if she were a vengeful ghost. Cold sweat broke out in a shower, soaking their collars. Their limbs began to shake uncontrollably. They understood. Now they understood why this woman was so calm, why she dared to question them about the law, why she asked to see her superiors. They had foolishly attacked someone with real power, someone who could ruin their careers with just one phone call. The sheer fear, the belated regret, the dark vision of the future that came crashing down on them almost made them collapse. Ada Sinclair ... Miller stuttered, his voice trembling, almost inaudible. He hurriedly approached but did not dare to get too close, his eyes filled with panic and pleading. "Oh my God! We are so sorry. We had no idea. We honestly had no idea it was you." Yes, Vance stammered along, his face drained of color. This is just a terrible misunderstanding. We were too angry. We were completely wrong. Please, ADA, be generous. Please forgive us this time. Don't destroy us." They began to pour out pathetic pleas, trying to blame it on stress, on misunderstandings, on anything but their own ignorance and prejudice. Miller even fumbled in his pocket for the keys, intending to unlock Naomi's handcuffs himself. But Naomi Sinclair just stared at them coldly, expressionless. Disdain was evident in her eyes. She did not respond to their pleas. Instead, she turned to the still dumbfounded duty officer. "I'll call the district attorney." The officer nodded hastily, signaling someone else to run and report urgently to the police station commander and possibly the court leader. This scandal was about to explode. The incident of a deputy prosecutor being insulted and illegally arrested by the police in the courthouse caused a huge shock, spreading quickly from the small security room to the ears of the district attorney and the city police department commander. Both top leaders of the two local law enforcement agencies were aware of the seriousness and unpredictable consequences of this scandal. The district attorney and the police chief quickly arrived at the courthouse. After hearing the preliminary report and the detailed, well-documented presentation from ADA Naomi Sinclair, the anger of both leaders reached its peak. They were angry not only at the blatant abuse of power and discrimination by Officer Miller and Vance, but also at the serious damage this incident had done to the cooperative relationship between the two agencies and the reputation of the entire legal system. The decision was made almost immediately. Officer Frank Miller and Officer Chris Vance were suspended indefinitely. An expedited internal investigation led by the police department's Internal Affairs Division was launched, operating under the strict supervision and absolute transparency of the district attorney's office. At the same time, to ensure objectivity, the district attorney referred the case to a higher level for consideration of possible criminal charges against the two officers. The investigation did not stop with the ADA Sinclair incident. At the request of the district attorney and as part of a rigorous internal investigation, Miller and Vance's entire work records over the years were turned over and thoroughly reviewed. And that's when the dark corners began to come to light. Investigators discovered that Officer Miller had an alarming history of misconduct. Numerous citizen complaints about his overbearing, discriminatory behavior had been ignored or handled in a cursory manner. More seriously, new evidence and testimony showed that Miller had repeatedly accepted small bribes to turn a blind eye to traffic violations and other minor incidents. He also had several reports of using unnecessary force in previous arrests. As for Officer Vance, although younger and with a cleaner record, there were also several reports of his temper, agitation, and lack of restraint when dealing with members of the public. The incident with Ada Sinclair was just the culmination of a long-standing pattern of misconduct and corruption. With the undeniable evidence from the current case, Ada Sinclair's testimony, court witnesses, even hallway security cameras, combined with their tainted pasts being exposed, the end for Miller and Vance is inevitable. After completing the investigation, both were permanently dismissed from the police force. This decision was widely announced as an affirmation of the seriousness and determination of the leadership to clean up the force. At the same time, based on the evidence collected, the Office of the Special Prosecutor decided to prosecute both Miller and Vance. They face a series of charges: misdemeanor assault, unlawful detention, abuse of power. Miller also faces additional charges related to past corruption. The trial was closely watched by the public and legal community. The evidence was presented convincingly. Miller and Vance could not offer any plausible excuse for their actions. In the end, the court found both guilty. The judge who presided over the trial strongly condemned the abuse of power and racial discrimination that took place in the sanctity of the law. He also emphasized the dangers of corruption and degradation in the police force, which erode public trust. Considering the seriousness of the multiple charges, especially the assault on a prosecutor and Miller's past misconduct, the court sentenced Miller to 5 years in prison, Vance to 3 years in prison. The harsh sentence brought justice to ADA Naomi Sinclair and sent a clear message that no one, regardless of the uniform they wear, is above the law. The case became a valuable lesson in the need for close supervision, strict handling of all wrongdoings, and the relentless fight against prejudice and corruption in the public sector. Naomi Sinclair continues her work with a brave heart and even greater determination. She knows that the road ahead is full of thorns, but she will never stop fighting for truth and justice, for all those who have been and are victims of inequality. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories, because tomorrow we will have another meaningful story for you.